We're going to continue our series on Jesus Builds the Church, We Make Disciples. This week, we are going to be looking at Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20. And before I read this, I just want to share the context, and that is that just previous to this passage, Jesus had been having significant conflict with the Pharisees. So just keep that in mind as we jump into reading this text. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gate of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So I want to just go through this verse by verse, um, pulling out some stuff, giving some context for us for our discussion that we're going to be having. So starting off at the beginning, so they went to Caesarea Philippi. That was 25 miles north and east of the Sea of Galilee. So that's, at least 2 days of walk to get there. This region was mostly a Gentile region. So usually Jesus spent most of his time in areas that were mostly Jewish, but this area, even though it was in the Jewish sphere of influence, was mostly Gentile. This area also was known for its religiosity. So there was a Caesar statue there. Caesar worship was a thing that happened. The emperor was worshipped. Uh, this town obviously has the name Caesar in it, and so this was a place where he was worshipped heavily. But also, in terms of pagan religions, there was close by to Caesarea Philippi was a hill that was supposedly the birthplace of the Greek nature god Pan. So there's a lot of a religion happening in this area. And so when Jesus says, "Who do the people say that I am?" Uh, he's saying this in the backdrop of a lot of other gods. A lot of other religions were present. So the answers that the disciples give when they say, "Who do others say that I am?" Jesus ultimately is in the category of prophets. Um, John, Elijah, and Jeremiah, all of them were prophets. So that puts Jesus up on a pedestal a little bit. They respected him as a prophet, but Jesus was obviously much more than that. These prophets that are mentioned uh, all were understood to proclaim the coming Messiah, and John in particular, he had only recently died. Elijah uh, was a prophet who actually he didn't die. He was taken up to heaven before he died a natural death, and it was believed that he would come back before the Messiah would come. And there was similar beliefs about Jeremiah, even though he actually did die. Um, in the time period where we stop getting our Old Testament, more books were written that were understood to be from God for the Jewish people, and in those books, especially Second Esdras, there was this understanding that Jeremiah would return. So people are seeing Jesus as this prophet before the Messiah comes. But then Jesus says, "Okay, I know what you tell me what the other people think. Who do you, my friends, my disciples, the people that I spend my time with, who do you say that I am?" To Jesus, He cares what the crowds think, but ultimately he cares about the people that are closest to him and those who he is spending his time investing in. And so Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." This is the first time that Jesus is referred to by somebody in the text as the Messiah. The narrator identifies Jesus as the Messiah, but this is the first time a character, somebody who was alive during that time, um, and is a character, is saying this to Jesus, or saying this about Jesus. And so, who is the Messiah? The Messiah, or the Christ, those are the same word, uh, was a figure that the Jews were looking forward to. He had been prophesied in the Old Testament. It means the anointed one, so somebody who has been anointed by God. It was often understood in that time period to be a political and military leader who would come and free the Jews from the oppression that was on them by the Roman leaders, um, or whoever at the time happened to be on running the land of Israel. So he's also identified as the Son of the living God. So that's not just saying that he was this Messiah, this man that would come, but Son of the living God. To be called the Son of God would be putting Jesus in the realm of divinity. If God is divine and you are the Son of God, then that must mean you also are divine. So Peter is really elevating Jesus compared to what all of the other people were saying. So, in response, Jesus says, Simon, son of Jonah. And so this is a parallel I want to point out. So Peter says, okay, you are Jesus, Messiah, son of God. And then Jesus responds with, you are Simon, son of Jonah. So we're supposed to see this parallel that Simon is the son of a human guy. Jesus is really taking on this role of Son of God and making it clearer through this parallel. But we also see some special revelation that Peter gets. Peter wouldn't be able to discern that Jesus was as special as he was just on his own skill, just on his own investigations, just on his own hunches. It was something that was especially given to him by the Father, Jesus says. And as we've been spending so much time in revelation and response as a church, uh, Peter got this revelation, and it's reoriented his life as he is responding to it, and as Jesus is specifically asking him, "What do you know?" He's giving that answer. That revelation changes his relationship with Jesus. So, moving to verse 18, Jesus says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." So Peter's name means rock. So his name was Simon. That was his given name at birth. But Jesus started calling him Peter. Ever since his introduction in the book of Matthew, we don't get the name change scene like we get in some of the other gospels, especially in John. Um, but in Matthew 4:18 is the first time we see Peter introduced, and it says Simon called Peter. So this is the name that Jesus has been giving him, meaning rock. And it was all in anticipation of this moment and what Peter was going to be doing. So saying, on this rock I will build my church, this name that Jesus has given him, saying, I'm going to build my church based on who you are, Peter. I'm going to build it on people, and you are one of the people I'm going to build it on. So with this, this name connection matters. So that really draws it out. It's saying that Peter is going to be the foundation for how the church is grown. So, does this look like the totality of Peter's ministry after Jesus ascends? We don't know exactly what it means. It could be that. It could be Peter's sermon in Acts 2 when 3,000 believers come to faith through his decisive preaching action. It could also be in Acts 10 when through Peter's ministry the Gentiles are welcomed into the church. But this rock, and through what Peter is doing, this church is being built on the work that Peter is doing and Jesus is using for the sake of his church. But ultimately, this is about Jesus building the church. Um, it doesn't say, I'm going to build a church. Jesus says, I'm going to build my church. So the Greek word used there is ekklesia. And when there was a book called the Septuagint, that was the the Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures. And so that word ekklesia was used to mean the people of God in that book. It was a general Greek word, but in a religious sense, that's what this was saying. And so when Jesus says, I will build my ekklesia, uh, he's saying, I'm going to build my congregation. I'm going to build the people of God, this new people of God on you, Peter. I'm going to be the one who's doing it. And Peter, like I said earlier, he's involved. Um, the disciples of Jesus are involved in this, but Jesus is the one who's actually the chief builder. He's the one who is doing all of the work. He doesn't say, on this rock, you will build my church. He could have said that. He certainly has the power to say that. It's his church. He can have it built however he wants. But Jesus is taking the main builder actions here, and he's choosing to be the one that builds it. Further on, it says that this church, the powers of Hades, the power of hell, is not going to be able to overcome it, not stand against it. Um, so this is saying that the church is going to be more powerful than death. It's going to be more powerful than anything that the world, anything that hell can throw at it. I think that it's worth mentioning here that this doesn't mean that there's not going to be small things that uh, the church has problems with. But thinking about it as a war, it means that ultimately the church is going to prevail. But when you win a war, that doesn't necessarily mean you win every battle, but it means that you have the decisive victory at the end, and there's no questioning who is the winner. And so I think that it's important to keep in mind that doesn't mean we're not going to face, as members of the church or members of a local church, individually or corporately, we're not going to face problems. I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 15, verses 55, where it says, O death, where is your sting? So it doesn't mean that death is not something that we encounter. It just means that it doesn't have any big bearing on us moving forward compared to not the work that Jesus had done. It doesn't sting us as much. Moving on, he says that Peter's going to have the power to bind and loose things. So what does this mean? This is a rabbinical idea about permitting or prohibiting things under the law. So there are certain fringe cases in rabbinical Judaism. It was unclear. Well, what happens in this case? Does this law apply or does this law apply? So binding and loosing is about uh, giving the best way to live, the best way to conduct life. And so Peter is given this authority, and ultimately we see in Matthew 18 that this Matthew 18 verses 18 that this is not just for Peter, but this is for all of the disciples. And so it's setting the stage for this is how the community is going to live. This is what we're going to allow. This is what we're not going to allow. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. These disciples are the leaders of the church. And so the leaders are obviously going to set the culture and set sort of where the boundary marks, especially in this early community. And Jesus also says that Peter is going to get the keys to the kingdom. So this means that Peter has the authority to regulate the affairs of the household. It's a position of authority. So again, it's very similar to what was just being said about the binding and loosing. And finally, we close this off in verse 20 where Jesus says, don't tell anybody that I'm the Messiah. So Jesus often was telling people, don't tell anybody who I am. He wasn't ready to deal with what it meant to be the Messiah yet because he knew that being the Messiah would lead to his death. He'd prevented demons from telling people who he was. He had asked other people who he had healed not to share that. And so being a Messiah had a lot of connotations attached to it, right? This military political leader we talked about earlier. And so if people were going around saying this is the Messiah, Jesus was going to be more heavily scrutinized by the religious leaders, and the crowds were going to expect a lot out of him. And so Jesus wasn't going to be able to move in the way that he actually wanted to. So the time comes and he takes on this mantle of the Messiah, but it's not time yet. And this also points to why they're far away from the Jewish territory right now, why they're sort of out in the boonies, because they can have this conversation. They can say, "You are the Messiah." Jesus can own that, but they don't have to worry about somebody overhearing them. So as we come to the end of this passage, spend some time in silent reflection, thinking about where is there conflict for you in this passage, and where is there clarity for you in this passage.